Welcome back, everyone, to the Singularities Global Summit here live in San Francisco, California, with our friend Richard Whitt. Richard, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me here.
So what brings you, Richard Whitt, to the Global Summit?
So I just left Google after 11 and a half years. I'm currently running my own business around a new open, accountable web. And I just got off stage half hour ago with Doc Searles. Doc is a editor of the Linux Journal, well-known figure in the internet community. And we were basically having a riffing back and forth for about 20 minutes on stage about why we need to have a more accountable, trustworthy web. So I was honored to be invited to speak here and talk with folks like you about where we've sort of gone astray in the past, say, 10, 20 years of the evolution of the web, and where we can still have the ability to create agency and autonomy for ordinary users.
So I thought, excuse my language, I thought we were already screwed. Like, I thought it's my generation, I've got all my Facebook photos out there, I've got all my information somewhere in all these different servers with companies like textbooks from school, with Dick's Sporting Goods, retailers, all these different types of businesses. They have all my information already, so how may a solution help me out?
Well, one of the things to think about is the information they have about you is who you were today, or maybe last week or last year.
Oh.
And they may have some basic biographical information about you, your street address, your age, that kind of thing. But the great thing about being a human being is we're constantly evolving, we're changing all the time. So because you wanted to buy that set of skis last week doesn't mean you want to buy that same set of skis next week. And yet that's where today the platform companies and the aggregators and the advertising and merchandising space, that's basically the signals they're operating off of. They're operating off of what you were at one point, and they want to keep sort of repeating that and inferring from data sets what that means. But in fact, we're always changing. So in some ways, the most rich, robust data about yourself, your life experiences, I call it your life stream, it's still ahead of you. And so that is information that increasingly is going to be more and more valuable, more and more beneficial to you and others to tap into to give you actual agency over it. And so that's where the opportunity is to say, hey, we don't need the paradigm we have today. It's actually not great for anybody. The platform companies do wonderfully. Advertisers don't like it, users don't like it. And so there's an opportunity to step in and say, let's try a different approach where at the end of the day, your data is something you own and control, but it's about you and how you want to be perceived and how you want your identity and yourself to be sort of seen on the web going forward.
So is there an incentive for businesses to do this, to get rid of their server farms and empower the people who have that? And I know you just mentioned marketing. Can you guys explain to our audience, what the vision looks like?
Yeah, so the vision is two things. So I call it old rules and new tools. The old rules is going back to the basic market dynamics that Adam Smith and the classic economists of the 19th century would recognize, which is markets that are based on willing buyers and willing sellers. Today we have the platform economy, and the platforms are the ones that are sort of mediating for us between ourselves and all the stuff happening on the web. And so that relationship works extremely well for the platforms because they're all taking a cut from all of what's happening there. But the vision here is, let's still have platforms, but let's have platforms that actually serve me. And the old rules part is fiduciary obligation. So duty of care, duty of loyalty. So you think about professions where we already entrust very critical private information about ourselves. Doctors, lawyers, certain forms of accountants and financial advisors. They have access to stuff about us that we don't want anybody else to have access to, but yet we want them to have it because then that gives them the correct diagnosis or how to best defend us in a criminal suit or whatever it is that's going on. And so take some of those notions, these old obligations from the common law of fiduciaries and loyalty, and now apply that in this context. So you have an intermediary that opts into those obligations, those duties, to interact directly with me and represent my interests. So loyalty to me as the actual customer or client. It's very different from the dynamic today because today we are users, and the users, we are the objects essentially of what's called surveillance capitalism, at least by some folks. It's data extraction and analysis coming at us from the platform side. And so we are the passive objects of that stuff. The notion is let's right the balance so the platform works for us so we are now in the driver's seat. We have the agency and the autonomy. And then the new tools part of that is let's take all these amazing things that are being developed and being brought out here at Singularity, and AIs and the way to all these hardware, software configurations that can do these really awesome stuff, virtual reality, etc. But let's make that mine rather than wait for somebody like Google or Facebook or Amazon to deploy it under the same paradigm they have today. Let's take advantage of the fact these technologies are there, and let's seize them for ourselves. So for example, we have a personalized AI that interacts directly with Alexa and Google Assistant and Siri and Cortana and says, hey, on a real-time basis, I'm representing Richard here, and Richard has cognitive overload. There's no way he can make all the decisions he needs to make on the online space or the offline world, but with the help of a personalized AI, that can actually happen. It can be trained to, with machine learning to represent me and what I want, and then it can go out there in the world. And whether it's online or in an offline space with IoT sensors and biometrics all over the place, it can be there to sort of put a shield around you to have a negotiation over whether or not to give access to you and your emotion, your gauge, all the things that they want to get from you so they can try to sell you stuff. So it just shifts the balance back to the end user with these old rules around fiduciaries and the new tools that hopefully we can harness and bring to the user side of the equation, not on the other side, the platform side.
So in the future, are you suggesting like all these companies and data farms, these cloudlets are going to have different AI, like users are all going to have different AIs that can correspond to each other and make exchanges based off of personal settings that you make for it?
Yeah, that's the basic concept. And the thing that's interesting to me is that the technology is already there. So Apple, for example, has invested in a number of companies that have created what they call on-device, off-cloud. So it's an AI that sits on your phone, and it doesn't have to interact directly with the web. It can you can create your own sort of localized connectivity that's not necessarily going into the cloud. And because of that, then you can give it its own sort of purpose and train it based on indicators coming solely from you, with the help, again, of an intermediary, because this is all fairly complicated stuff. But the tech is there today. And Google, 2 months ago at their I/O conference, talked about taking an enormous amount of computational capacity and squeezing it down to just this tiny bit that now can serve in an offline basis. So you're on an airline for 10 hours, you don't have access to Wi-Fi, the AI is still running and still working, except that in that case, it's representing Google on your phone. So it's responding to the signals coming from them and the incentive structures they've developed. So my only thought is, great, they can have that, but I want to have my own as well, so that I have the ability then to sort of have those negotiations, maybe the need for pushback against incursions into my autonomy and my agency when the other AIs are doing things I'm not happy about.
Richard, with technology always growing and improving, there's always pros and cons to everything. I know probably when we all set up the data service, we didn't expect to have all these hackers come in and potentially steal our data from us. What are some of the discussions that you're having with leaders in this space about eliminating some threats, and what are some possibilities?
Yeah, so one of the ideas here is if you get away from having the cloud, which is where you've got all your stuff sitting out there on these server farms, right? They're very vulnerable and they become obvious targets. So anybody who wants to create a big breach, you got lots of information, they know where to go. They're going to go to major financial institutions, they're going to go to Facebook and Google, they're going to grab at any moment 50 or 100 million accounts. If you take this and make this much more localized, and so everybody has their own potentially own end-to-end encrypted sort of shield around themselves, suddenly you've got 10, 100 million, let's say in the United States at least, of these systems. You've created the attack surface from the breacher's perspective. It's like, how the hell am I going to get at that, right? There's just so much to go after. And then what you gain from that is a relatively small sliver. So even if you happen to get through my system, you get Richard Whitt stuff, you don't get your stuff, or 10 or 50 or 100 million other people's stuff. So that, I've talked to security experts that said, yeah, the more you decentralize, maybe using blockchain and some other technologies around the identity layer and personalization, then you're basically disaggregating the ability for folks to come after me to breach. The other part of this is data protection, right? So we have the GDPR in Europe, we've got the California law. That's all based on the consent structure, that I'm consenting to people taking my data. We've all seen now in the past several months as websites and applications are now starting to become compliant with GDPR, it's the same old stuff that we used to click through before. It's just saying, you've got consent, please give the click and then we'll take your data, right? So we are overwhelmed by the need to consent to stuff. It's a broken system. Basically, consent doesn't really work in the real world anymore. And so if you again change the paradigm so that I'm the one consenting initially to these interactions, so people coming to me have to go through my intermediary first, it makes it a more manageable process. In fact, I'm the one then basically throwing my consent out to the web rather than consenting to what they want. I'm then say, no, wait, you're consenting to what I want. So I want to have, one shopping cart I can take from place to place. I want one fraud control, one place where all my passwords are managed for me, or one credit card spot. One place where all these things can happen, and that I then have much more control over the relationships, with all the countless websites and apps that I interact with.
It's exciting times. For something to happen like that as an end user would be just great. It would make me not worry anymore when I have to click that button for consent and not know who's checking out my data and who's sending me random texts and I have no idea who it is, because that has happened before.
Yeah.
So this takes a lot of a big vision. This takes a lot of steps to get there. It takes a lot of leadership. So Richard, the last question I have for you is, what is your definition of a real leader?
That's a great question. And I thought, actually, when I saw The Real Leader, your magazine here, and I actually thought for a second, what is it to be a real leader? And I've heard people say, well, a real leader is somebody who has like 10 or 20 leaders under them, right? But I think in the web, there's an opportunity for the leaders. To be a real leader means you've got 10 million leaders. Those 10 million leaders are your customers, they're your clients. They're the ones that you are taking the signals from rather than imposing your signals on them. And if you give them sort of the leeway to represent themselves and tell you what they want, and you listen carefully, and then you respond with the technologies and with the business models and all the sort of governance structures that make it happen, you can be essentially their leader, but in a way where you're taking the best of what they're giving you, and then you're turning around and you're creating opportunities for, of course, for you and the people you work with, but you're giving that agency and control back to the actual human being, the end users in the network. So maybe a definition of leader in the web context is, and it's a bit like, Steve Jobs, right? I mean, he took a lot of his signals from where he thought people wanted to go, but he didn't impose it on them. He listened and he understood, and he had a very unique way of doing that. And so I think to be a leader in that style, in this era, I think would one that really generates enormous value for yourself, but also for the people that you're working with.
Interesting, Richard. A very interesting response. Don't impose, but take those signals in. I like the response. Appreciate your time here on the Real Leaders Live here at the Global Summit presented by Singularity University in San Francisco, California. Richard, appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.